Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. You ready for another episode of My Bigfoot Sighting? Alright then, let's do this.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, love's in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.
If you'd like to be able to listen to the show without ads and have full access to bonus content, that's an option. To find out how, please go to mybigfootsighting.com.
My Bigfoot sighting happened in the Adirondacks. I've lived here my whole life. We live in a small valley that's surrounded on all four sides by state lands and mountains. I live close by Whiteface, so we do a lot of skiing around here too. To give you an idea of how much snow we get, so we're incredibly isolated. I think people, when they hear New York State, often think of the city, but we have passports because we go to Canada more often than we would ever go down to the city. But as far as isolated, and it's a small place, about 5,000 people in the county, but this is a very spread out county of forest and pasture. And if there is no pasture, they pasture in the forest. So I learned at an early age that vegetation in the forest, I almost felt, became its own entity for me, as it just, we had a deep scar from a bluestone quarry, and within my lifetime, that forest covered that whole thing up. But as far as my Bigfoot sighting, it was just happenstance. We, both of us, I think, happened to run into each other. I can't remember exactly what the year was. I'm going to say 92. But I do remember what time of year it was. And it was in February. Probably around the 1st of December, because it was also gun season. We have a lot of whitetail around here. A lot of people that live hand to mouth, and hunting is a big deal around here. Well, that day I was picking what's called princess pine. And princess pine grows, most of the forests in the Adirondacks are pine. Not a lot of hardwoods like other forests. But I would go into the foothills before I ever started to go up steep. And I also knew of the logging roads because my husband's a logger. And most people there are loggers if they're not farming it. So that day I had to go pick princess pine. And I was on a mission because this pine makes garlands and Christmas wreaths, things like that. I just wanted to stuff a bunch of bags full of it so I could get home. I was obligated to make some for some people, so I was on a mission. I always stay in the foothills, but those foothills are still, although man-planted, they all look alike. Although I lived right across from it, so it became second nature for me, and I never really developed a natural fear of animals in the forest. In fact, I'm a vet tech now. I do remember my parents telling us, don't go further than the hardwoods. There's wild dogs. And we did have stuff like fish or cats screaming and stuff like that. But this was, like I said, 20 years ago. And this town is another 20 years behind. We've all had like 2 channels on our TV, and party lines. So we weren't really that informed. Of course, I knew about Bigfoot, but not much. And I really didn't have that much of a reference. He was some kind of a vague myth for me. Well, back to that day, I left my infant to be babysat by my mom, and I took the four-wheeler, and I knew enough about the old roads out there, the old logging roads, where that I could take myself on that four-wheeler and sort of go from, I could take myself so I could park the four-wheeler on the road, and then I would just drop myself right down into the center of this forest. And I knew exactly where the princess pine was, which grows on the forest floor. And this forest had probably 1.5 feet of pine straw, years worth of pine straw. And then that stuff starts to weave together and become springy and quiet. And also, as far as quiet, this is the dead of winter in New York. There's nothing. There's no bugs. There's crows, and they tend to try to find somewhere warmer even. The birds are gone, so it's just quieter. So I marched myself down into the center of that forest, and then I started walking down a pathway. And those are natural pathways because, again, it's a man-planted forest, about 4 foot between. And I wasn't paying too much attention, and I ran right up into a big dead doe. And I want to say like an 80-pound doe big. And she was laying on her side, but I didn't see any blood, nothing at all. And I stopped and I thought, wow, that's weird. I've never seen a dead animal in the woods, and a dead deer, I should say, at least not, predated on or something, or a bullet wound for that matter. But like I said, I couldn't see its other side either, but it looked like the thing just fell right over dead. So I stopped it, looked and checked that out for a minute and stepped over it and kept going. And I knew where the princess pine was, and you can't see it because it is growing underneath all that pine straw. So I got to where I knew where there was a patch, and I started to pull back the pine straw. So I'm down crawling around to do this, and in an instant, I felt fear. And every hair on my body pricked up. And I tried to ignore it for 2 seconds maybe, and then I just felt like I was in danger and said, forget it, I'm out of here. So I stood up and I was lost for a second, which has never happened to me before either. This is my backyard. I guess just being so weirded out, I felt somebody was watching me, everything. And so I stood up and I took a couple circles around looking like, where am I? And I took about a half more circle, and there he was, standing in front of me in all of his glory. And so Bigfoot was in front of me. I'm bad at distances, but I want to say 20 feet, maybe 30. Behind me was the dead doe. So I stopped when I saw him. He took up that whole path. I couldn't see over him, around him, underneath him, nothing. There was nothing in front of me but him. And nothing obstructing him, not even a bush. So I don't have the vocabulary to describe the kind of fear I was in. I was frozen in place, and the terror and the confusion. And I was so confused. And I describe it as my brain going through like a Rolodex with like two things to it. I kept going to, did this thing escape from a zoo? To, did this escape from someone's house? Those were my illogical go-tos for what it was. But I couldn't comprehend, and it froze me. That primal fear, when I look back on it, I even feel as though my hearing, everything was muted. So him and I looked in each other's eyes for 10 seconds, and I got a good hard look at him. I always describe him first as out of proportion. His head seemed small. The most defining thing about this Bigfoot was that he had a broken jaw. And his whole lower jaw, from about mid-tooth back, was pushed in. And I could see he had one broken canine gone. It was just gone. And, flat teeth, like I've heard described, but broken. And his mouth was also open. And I don't think from the broken jaw, I think he was silently growling at me. And also, his eyes were mad, and they were amber, and I could see whites in them. And so his face, it had, well, let me finish by saying that the top, he was dark black, like a black bear, except for the top of his head. He almost had like a wig on. It was weird, and a different color, like an auburnish red compared to the rest of him. His head seemed small compared to incredibly wide shoulders. I think part of that illusion was that his hair was long, so it came down and melted over his neck. I'm trying to go down a piece at a time. So his chest and his shoulders, well, from about nipple up, I'd say he was soaking wet. And I realized he was running into the tops of the trees. I never heard him, not once. I never smelled him. That heavy pine straw helps. It's quiet. So then he's got these real broad shoulders and real, of course, muscular forearms. And then almost like Popeye, his elbow area would get small, but then his upper arm and then his forearm again, huge. And as far as his chest, the reason I mentioned he was wet is I could see from about nipple up his chest, and I could see it was wet, and his skin was black. He had like a heart-shaped area where there was no hair, but I could see veins running from like mid-breast area all the way up into his armpits, if they weren't stretch marks. I don't know. He was, aside from his jaw, I would say probably a pretty healthy specimen. He almost had like a beer gut. I could definitely tell he was a guy, a male. And then again, out of proportion, his legs were, albeit muscular, seemed smaller than the rest of his body to hold him up. He certainly gave me the impression that I could picture this animal dropping down and running on his knuckles. I could also see his feet, and yes, they were big. And his toes were long, and they were splayed apart and gripping the pine straw as well. So as we both stood there staring at each other for that 10 seconds or so, which of course felt like an eternity, I 100% thought I was going to die in a terrible way. And then all of a sudden I could hear him sucking air. And as soon as he sucked in that air, and then he tipped back and he huffed. And that huff was just as loud as the sound of him sucking in air. Well, that huff broke my spell. And I took off. And I had to run uphill because I had parked uphill. Well, the first thing I did was ran face first into a tree. Sent me backwards, sent my glasses flying, and I just scrambled, got back up. And because I'm running uphill, I had to kind of crawl run. I had no capacity in me to turn my head to see if he was behind me. Nothing except to look straight forward and run. Well, about 10 seconds later, a gunshot went by me. And you can tell when a gunshot is whizzing by your ear. That happened. I finally got up on top, got in my four-wheeler, and got home. Never knew what the gunshot was about. I wondered, did somebody help me? Were they still looking for that deer? They're not ones to poach around here. They're not going to leave a doe for no rack. So I don't know. You know, I always have all these questions. I've never had enough answers, and I never will. So I hurried the heck home. And the first thing I did was I called my mom and I said, Mom, I saw I called it a monkey, a giant monkey. I saw a giant monkey in the woods. And I thought she was going to believe me, hook, line, and, just believe me, no questions asked. And she laughed, and I was shocked. I thought she was going to believe me, but I was a mess. And so I decided to spend the night at my parents' house, and I must have looked as shocked as I felt because my dad came in, and who's a real stoic guy who doesn't do stuff like this much, and asked me if I was all right. And of course I told him that I was, but it was at that moment that I realized I just can't tell people about this. I just can't. I was going to start telling my husband, who was a logger, and I started for years. And I started out with, have you guys ever seen Bigfoot out there? And he laughed and said, oh my God, why do people ask me that all the time? And I also know that he would tell me it was a black bear. Although in the middle of December is rare around here unless you've got a nuisance bear, and they're going to be inside a dumpster anyway. So, but anyway, I got home and I didn't know what was happening at the time. It took some looking back, but I realized I had some real PTSD from it and some real couple of years of the worst kind of nightmares, and they were about animals, of course. And I still went to school and became a vet tech, but it took some doing. And I did get on some medication. I never told them why, but I did say, listen, I'm having nightmares, and got on a short stint of medication, and it helped. But it's something that I never, ever stopped thinking about. And then finally the internet came around, and I had already been calling it Bigfoot by then. But as I started reading about other people that had had experiences, and I started to realize that there were groups of people out there that had had experiences, and especially people's experiences that related to mine. I call them those thunderbolt moments where somebody has kind of the same thought process as I had, or something that's similar. So the internet and just knowledge has helped me tremendously. But what it never does help me with is the questions that I will always have, and unfortunately probably always will. And I feel like if I have an answer to one question, it'll create 20 more. But I mean, it's a fast moment for your life to turn around and realize that the things that you thought don't exist do. And another lesson that I learned, I'm capable of critical thinking, but another thing I learned is that if somebody tells me something, I believe them. I do think Sasquatch could be dangerous, and I feel like I got lucky. And I do think they're no different than people. I don't think there's very many of them around, but I think they're capable of the language and of using tools and hiding. And I think lastly, the thing that surprised me the most about the Bigfoot that I saw was that gigantic thing could be so, he was a good 8 feet tall, could be so agile. But I don't think he ever chased me. And I do feel like I walked away. Nobody, at least whoever was shooting willy-nilly, didn't shoot me. And as much as I was waiting for Sasquatch to reach and grab me from behind, he never even chased me. And that is my experience in the Adirondacks.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let us know. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves in the plow, and the 5-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. The sound of a memory brings me back to the bluegrass playing on my dad's 8-track. His pickup man had been through it, getting through the day on Scruggs and Skags, booking 8 bales to those Tennessee jams. There's no other way that I'd do it. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Something coming backwards in double time, getting to the soul in the tremolo Kentucky style. Those are the anthems strumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Pace of the city life drives me wild. The only tune is the cars rushing by, with the bass on the stereos booming. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Something going backwards in double time, getting to the soul in the tremolo Kentucky style. Those are the anthems strumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. mama's best sweet tea. Got the sound